This video will help the Passap dealer become more familiar with adjustments and procedures in the repair of the electronic 6000. The first procedure that we would like to show you is the removal of the electronic 6000's second brake spring. Okay, pull it out with a screwdriver just a little bit, disconnect the looped end, now pull the rail all the way out. Now remove the spring. Note the little white spring insert on the end of the spring. Now when you're ready to put it back in, just feed it straight into the bed of the machine. Okay, now leave just a small portion of the spring outside. Now at this point we will run the rail underneath the spring and into the bed. Now hook the looped end of the spring onto the rail. Now push both all the way inside. The next procedure that we would like to show you is the replacement of a needle channel. Okay, let's suppose that the channel right here is damaged. This is the one that we want to remove. Okay, we'll need to remove this bolt here and this bolt here. This one here and this one here. Note we're removing two bolts on each side of the channel that we wish to remove. Okay, pull out the needle bar. This is so that we can remove the needle. Okay, push up the needle. Make sure that the latch is closed. Pull the needle foot towards you. Work it over the lower railing and out. Make sure that the latch stays closed while you do this. Okay, now remove the pusher in the channel that we've just removed the needle from. Pull it up and pull it out towards you and work it over the lower railing. Now remove the two pushers just to the side of the one that we have just removed. It's okay for those needles to stay in place. Now remove all four edge springs. Okay, make sure that the machine is in transport position. To know that, look at these two arrows. They should be directly across from each other. If they're not, you will need to turn the racking handle until they are. Okay, now with the machine tipped over, working off of a workbench, we're going to remove the bolts that we were just talking about. Okay, we're loosening the nuts on the other side of the machine right here. We're using a 5.5 box spanner. Okay, now we're getting the washer and we're pushing the bolt out from the other side. Now this one. Removing the nut. Now removing the washer and pulling the bolt out from the other side. Now remove the other two on the other side of the bad needle channel. Okay, we now want to loosen the rest of the bolts on the lower guide rail all the way across on the machine bed. We want to loosen them as much as possible. Okay, if you have trouble getting at this one here, you may need to remove the stand pad. Okay, continue loosening the bolts. Make them as loose as you can get them. Okay, now on the other side, again, make them as loose as you can get them without the nut falling off. Again, remember, we are loosening the lower railing. Okay, now lift the front part of the machine bed up and set a block or a box underneath it. We'll need to do this so as the rest of the procedures follow, we won't dump the pushers on the floor. Okay, now remove the second brake spring. Okay, now we're going to remove the lower rail. We got 4 screws that we need to remove here. Okay, the railing should now just pull off. Okay, now lift up the 2 needles just to the side of the bad channel. Okay, set a screwdriver. I got a number 4 right here underneath the lower bed and work the screwdriver blade up. Now pick at the bottom of the channel. The lower part of the channel should lift up. Now we can just pull the bad needle channel out. Okay, put in the new one. Slide it in. Push it back into place. Make sure that it's fully in. Okay, work the screwdriver out very carefully. Okay, now position the rail so it's flat and set into place. Okay, we can pull these needles down now right here. Okay, it's important to note that at the point where bed sections join, every once in a while they might use a small 0.2 of a millimeter shim. This will set right to the side of the needle channel. Okay, put the railing back into place just below the pushers. Okay, now fasten it into place. After you have it started, go in and put the remaining 3 screws into place and fasten it down. Okay, now put back into place the second brake spring. Okay, we now want to put back into place the bolts that we've removed. Okay, I've put the nut into the box spanner. I'm putting a little grease on the end of the nut in the box spanner. Now I'm going to set the washer on the grease, and this will hold it in place while I fasten it down. Okay, now run the bolt through from the other side. Okay, now fasten it down with the washer and the nut. And just make this snug. Don't cinch down on this. Okay, now the next one. Again, just make this snug. Don't cinch down. Okay, now the remaining two. Okay, once those are in place, now go through and tighten all of the nuts that we have previously loosened across the lower railing. Okay, don't forget about the other side. Okay, once that's done, go ahead and put the needle back into place. Make sure that the latch is open. Now the pushers. Okay, now put into place the edge springs. Now the needle bar. This concludes the replacement of the needle channel on the Electronic 6000. We now want to show you the adjustment of the auxiliary guiding piece. Loosen these two screws right here. Now push right here on the guiding piece up towards the lock handle. Now tighten these two screws. Move the lock back and forth to make sure that it's not too stiff. Okay, we now want to give you a small explanation of how the selection works. Okay, notice this little hole right here on this angular magnet cam. When the right side of this cam is activated by the electromagnet, it causes the pusher to pull downwards, and it's selected out into rest position. Okay, when the pusher comes through and the electromagnet is not activated, it's pulled through and comes out into working position. Okay, now note the small white pressing piece above the angular cam. Okay, this aids the angular magnet cam in determining selection. Okay, now let's go ahead and adjust the pressing piece. Okay, we're going to adjust it up because when the pressing piece is too far down, selection errors can occur by having pushers selected in rest position that should have been selected in work position, as well as pushers that should have been in work end up in rest position. Okay, now if we've adjusted it too high, we now want to adjust it down just a little bit. If it's too high, selection errors will occur by having pushers that should have been in rest position stay in working position. Okay, if we've determined that the selection is good moving one direction but not the other, we can compare the feel of the pushers moving through the different pressing pieces. We can then adjust the feel of the one that is not functioning correctly compared to the one that is functioning correctly. It's important to note that these pressing pieces will be replaced later by some not necessary to adjust. At that time, this adjustment is no longer critical. Another adjustment that determines selection is the adjustment of the selector support. To check this adjustment, fit the gauge as shown to the lock. Okay, here you see a close-up of how it's fitted to the lock. Now you can tell by diagram how it is fitted to the lock. Notice how G, the base cam, is flush up against the gauge. This is how the correct adjustment should look. Study it for a second. Okay, if the adjustment's not correct, to make the adjustment, we need to do a partial disassembly of the cam box. Okay, so let's take the handle off first of all. Now the NX lever knob. The row counter knob. Now the white cover. Pull the side out until the catch is released. Now the other side. Put the NX lever towards the middle. Now lift up, the white casing comes off. Okay, disconnect this cable from the white casing. Okay, we now want to loosen the 4 screws in the VM handle support. Loosen these all the way. Okay, let's now lift the handle support upwards. Lift it off the cam slider. Might have to wiggle it a little bit. Okay, lift it all the way off and pull the cable through. Okay, at this point, put the lock in the KX setting. Now we can remove the cam slider very easy. Lift up a little bit, pull away from the pusher cams, and out. Now remove the pusher cams. Make note of which is left and which is right and how they are positioned before you remove them. Okay, we're now to the point where we can now adjust the selector support. Okay, these 2 screws right here are used to adjust the selector support on this side of the cam box. And on the other side of the cam box, we have 2 screws for adjusting the selector support there. Here and here. Okay, let's suppose that we have this particular situation where there's a space between the base cam and the gauge. What we will want to do is to lift the base cam up towards the gauge. What we will do is we will loosen these 2 screws that we were just showing you. Okay, study this for just a second. Okay, by loosening these 2 screws right here, the base cam will lift towards the gauge. Turn one screw just a little bit and then go back to the other one. If for some reason the head of the screw is not flush with the ground plate, you have not taken enough time to go back to the other screw. Okay, now as we loosen these screws, you can see how the base cam will lift towards the gauge. Okay, just a little bit, then the other one. Do it until the base cam becomes flat up against the gauge. Okay, that concludes the adjustment of the selector support. Okay, at this point we could normally start to reassemble the cam box, but as long as we have it disassembled to this point, let's go ahead and remove the selector support so you can see how that's done. Okay, what we want to do is to remove these 3 screws right here. These 3 screws hold down the cam body on this particular side of the ground plate. Okay, now we're going to take out the 2 screws that we used to adjust our selector support. Okay, now on the other side of the ground plate, let's remove these 3 screws. Again, these 3 screws fasten down the cam body. Okay, now we want to remove the 2 adjustment screws for this side of the selector support. Okay, as you do this, be really careful not to damage any threads. Okay, we need to now take out this screw right here that fastens the print board of the selector support into place. Now this screw that fastens down the ground wire. Okay, now from the other side we can remove this little brush right here. Just pull straight out, comes off. Okay, now lift up on the selector support just a little and pull out the cam body. Now on the other side. Okay, we can now remove the selector support. Just lift up a little bit, pull it out a little bit at an angle. Okay, and then pull the cable through the ground plate. Okay, now don't forget this little white circular piece that will need to be attached to the selector support when we reassemble it. Okay, here you see the selector support. Okay, if we're exchanging selector supports, we'll need to remove these 4 springs right here. Okay, now we want to remove these 2 positioning pins. This one right here and this one right here. Incidentally, be careful not to touch the printed board. Okay, now on the one that you are now putting in, put the positioning pins back into place. Now the 4 springs. Okay, now the white circular piece fits right here. Try not to let this fall off during the reassembly procedure. Okay, we're just going to reassemble it in reverse order here. Put the cable through the ground plate. Now fit the selector support into place. You're going to have to put the printed board underneath the black runners. Okay, get it at the right angle. Okay, then it just slips into place. Okay, now to just temporarily hold the selector support in place, we're going to put in our adjustment screws. Okay, we're just going to turn them just a little bit for the moment. These 4 adjustment screws are going to have to be left loose for the moment so that we can fit the cam bodies back into place. Okay, now the cam bodies. Make sure that it's fit securely. Okay, now fasten the cam body down with the 3 screws. Again, as you do this, be very careful not to strip any thread. Okay, then of course do the cam body on the other side also. Okay, now that we've done the cam bodies on both sides, what we want to do now is to take our adjustment screws that are on the selector support and we're going to tighten them all the way down. This is so that when we make our adjustment that we're starting at a fixed point. Okay, before we make the adjustment now, let's go ahead and finish putting in place our selector support. Let's fasten the circuit board into place with this screw right here. Now the ground wire. Okay, let's put our gauge in place. We're now ready to adjust the selector support. Okay, now because we tightened down the adjustment screws, the base cam will be below the gauge. As you can see, there's space between the base cam and the gauge. Okay, as we alternate between loosening the two screws, the base cam lifts up until it is flat up against the gauge. Okay, now after we've adjusted the other side of the selector support, let's go ahead now and put into place our pusher cams. Okay, now the cam slider, fit it into place, fit the pusher cams into the cam slider. Okay, now take the cable and run it through the VM handle support. Slide the handle support up the cable. Now align the handle support with the cam slider. Okay, line it up, fit it into place. Okay, just wiggle it back and forth a little. Okay, fits into place. Okay, now let's tighten down the 4 screws in the handle support. Okay, let's not forget to put back in place this little brush. Push it in, it snaps into place. Okay, now let's fit the cable back into place. Okay, now fit the cable into the white housing. Okay. Turn the housing over. Fit it in place. Pull on the sides until the latches catch. Now on the other side. Okay, fit the cable a little higher up right here. Now the NX lever handle. Okay, let's just put it in GX setting as a precaution. Now the handle. Okay, now put in place the row counter knobs. This concludes the reassembly of our cam box. It would now be a good idea to test it on the machine for any selection errors. Remember, if you have completely replaced the selector support, the pressing pieces should be checked for correct pusher selection. We would now like to show you how to replace the major components of the electronic box. Okay, first of all, make sure that the electronic box is unplugged. Okay, now we're going to remove these 4 screws. Now carefully remove the back of the electronic box. Okay, the first major component that we'd like to show you how to replace is that of the main print board. Okay, let's now remove these 4 screws from our transformer. Okay, now this screw and its fixing piece that holds our cable in place. Okay, we can lift the cable out if we want. Okay, now we're just going to unscrew and remove the remaining screws in the print board. Now as you do this, keep in mind that you should not touch the print board with your fingers. Okay, now the positioning holder for our cable. This cable goes to and is attached to the card reader. Okay, now unplug this cable right here. It's the cable that goes to the card reader. I now want to unplug the current supply cable. Okay, it just unplugs there. Now at the switch. Okay, I now have a small white strap that's blocking me from separating the wires. Okay, I'm going to pull it down so that it's loose. Okay, but it's still blocking from separating the wires. Okay, I'm going to now very carefully cut the white strap, not the cable, the white strap. Okay, I removed the white strap. My cables are now separated. Alright, I can now very carefully lift out the printed board. Okay, I'm very lightly holding on to the transformer, trying to avoid touching the printed board. Okay, now a new or repaired printed board can now be set into place. Okay, we can now fasten down the holder for the cable that goes to the card reader. Now the remaining series of screws. Now be careful as you do this not to strip any threads. Okay, we have a ground wire here. Okay, now the cable. Now the current supply cable. Fit the switch into place. Now lay the cable in place. Okay, fasten the cable down now with the holding piece and the screw. Okay, now set this cable out of our way right here. Now don't forget the 4 screws that go into the transformer. Alright, now if we want to remove the card reader, this is the procedure that we would follow. Unplug the cable. Carefully lift it out of its holder. Work the catch back. Lift up. Okay, we now want to remove the 5 screws that fasten the holder to the casing. Now before removing the card reader, move this handle on the front towards the middle. Now lift out. We now want to show you how to remove the reader head. The reader head has the small print board on it. Okay, remove this handle here. Okay, now note these three wheels. We want to rotate these three wheels right here until the circular protrusions on the large wheels align with the small square protrusions on the small middle wheel. Okay, now check on the other side. You should have the same thing, except instead of circular nubs, there should be an arrow. You must have this positioned correctly. Otherwise, you will not know the correct position during reassembly. Okay, now on the other side, we're going to remove this C-clip right here. Again, now on the other side, we're going to remove this screw right here. And we're going to take out the middle gear. Okay, we can pull on this gear now. Now if we watch carefully, the axle will now pull through the card reader head. The card reader head can now be taken out. Just push it back, pull forward, now when we're ready to reassemble, push the cable through. Okay, position the reader head, push back. Make sure that when you do this and when you fit it in place that the lower ridge fits underneath the metal edge. Okay, now run the axle back through. Okay, check your alignments. Check them on both sides. Okay, on this side now, we can put the C-clip into place. Push down, snaps into place. And we're going to carefully turn it to make sure it doesn't pull off. Okay, now on the other side, put the middle gear in place, align it as we've talked about. Okay, now fasten into place with the screw and washer. Now fit into place the white wheel. Okay, now to fit the card reader back into place, we want to align the slider on the front of the casing with the slot on the reader head and then sit the reader into place. Okay, then slide back and forth to make sure that they slide together. Now fasten into place with the 5 screws. Okay, fasten the cable into its holder, set it out of the way. Okay, now plug it in. Okay, fit the back cover back into place. Now fasten down with the 4 screws. And be very careful, again, don't strip any threads. Now pull back this handle to the left. This concludes the reassembly of our electronic box and our electronic 6000 video.